The Labour Party slogan is a single word: change. Today, launching the Tory manifesto, Rishi Sunak came back with his two-word slogan, tax cuts. But don't take it from me, listen to this.
We are cutting taxes, tax reductions in taxation, tax cuts, cutting taxes, keep cutting taxes. That is a tax cut, my friends.
Tax cuts, you get it? Tax cuts, tax cuts, tax cuts. Well, not exactly a surprise, but then nor is the manifesto generally. That old wedding day slogan about something old, something new, something borrowed, and something blue is pretty appropriate. Something old? Well, quite a few of the promises, such on 40 new hospitals or new nuclear power stations, were in previous Tory manifestos. Something new? Well, the promise to cut national insurance would count for that. Ditto government-backed mortgages to help first-time buyers. Something borrowed. A windfall tax on oil and gas companies, borrowed from the Labour Party. Something blue? Well, take your pick. Rwanda, national service, or yes, of course, tax cuts. But the thing about tax cuts is that they have to be paid for with lower public spending. The Tory manifesto is entirely built on forcing many, many more people off benefits, sick benefits, disability benefits, and back into work, and also on cutting the jobs of large numbers of civil servants. Now, I'm sure there are some people in this country who really ought to be working and are living off benefits. But once you start to drive very large numbers of people into work in order to hit a financial target for your tax cuts, that's going to be incredibly difficult and eventually cruel. And again, I'm sure there are too many civil servants somewhere, hired presumably by this Conservative government. But if sacking them is the basis of your famous plan, you have to tell us which civil servants are going to lose their jobs, where and when. I mean, they're all paying tax too. And one final point in the show where you're going to hear cabinet ministers, former authors of Tory manifestos and pin-sharp analysis of the sums behind what Rishi Sunak said. I think I need to freelance now as a Conservative Party media advisor. The party led huge numbers of hacks, journalists up to Silverstone early this morning and then made them wait around for hours and then gave them a long press conference, but without any food. Not, I gather, so much as a stale crust or a biscuit for hours. My friends, that is not the way to get good coverage of your manifesto. Rule number 1, feed the brutes. To start with today, I'm joined by Gillian Keegan, the Education Secretary. Gillian, you should have given them some biscuits at least.
Well, there were biscuits there, Andrew. I'm surprised they didn't find them.
Very poor journalism in that case. Do you think, looking at his performance today, the Prime Minister did an effing good job?
There you go, that old joke. Actually, I did think he did a good job. This is going to come down to a clear choice at the election, and that's what we have always believed it would be, between cutting taxes, tax raises, between protecting pensioners and pensions being taxed for the first time in our country's history, between committing to 2.5% defence spending and not, and also a lot of the other things which you mentioned, which were in our manifesto. Obviously, we have been building and delivering a lot of things over 14 years, and take childcare, for example. We've already only just April the first sort of biggest expansion in childcare, the first rollout of it. The first part was in April, the second is in September. So we're actually in train with a lot of these plans as well, nuclear power, etc. So, that's why there's a lot of things that are continuing to get delivered, whether that's family hubs, childcare, etc.
And Gillian, you started, like the Prime Minister, by talking about tax cuts. Applying exactly the same methodology to your own spending plans as has been applied to Labour ones, what would be the outcome for individual taxes over the lifetime of the next Parliament? What's the number?
OK, so what we've done is, I think it's £1,300 in total, was the number that the Prime Minister made. But what we've done, you ask about funding, which is actually what a lot of the questions are going to be. How are you going to fund these tax cuts? Let me just jump in and
explain what I was talking about, because that hotbed of hardline Marxism, The Spectator magazine, applied exactly the same methodology to your plans as you have applied to the Labour Party's plans. And instead of raising people's taxes by £2,000, you, the Conservatives, would be raising them by £3,000.
Well, no, we won't, because we have a different plan to pay for anything that we've committed to. Well, clearly, if you're going to cut taxes, it does cost money. And we've obviously proven that we could do that. We said we wouldn't do it until we got inflation under control. That was a very, very important principle for economic stability. But now we have that, and we have our economic fundamentals, facing in the right direction, then that's what we've done. We've done it twice already, and we want to continue to do that. To pay for it, which is really an important question. You mentioned at the top of your share with the introduction about the welfare bill.
Exactly.
And also public civil servants.
Yes.
So I'll address both of those. So first of all, with civil servants, it's actually just going back to where we were pre-pandemic. Now, I just started as a minister just at a couple of months, a month and a bit before the pandemic. And what happened during the pandemic, quite understandably, is we actually increased the number of civil servants quite considerably to deal with an unprecedented situation. Many people came in on contracts, on short-term contracts. Some of them were made into permanent staff. But what we said all along is we will have to go back to the pre-pandemic levels once we've got over a lot of the pandemic. So that's the first thing. And in terms of welfare, it's kind of a similar...
Let me just jump in on the civil servants. Well, let me just jump in while people remember the civil service point, because these are still, real people doing real jobs and being paid at the moment. Do you know yet how many of your own civil servants in your department are going to have to lose their jobs, and elsewhere, how many civil servants are going to go, and when?
I do have the figures for the department, and what has happened is they have just what they've stopped is recruiting new people, and they've started moving people around, and also some people have retired, etc. So they've been able to do it in quite a gentle way because they've had enough time and leeway, because we've been talking about this for quite some time. In fact, we were probably talking about it from the beginning when we said, we can't obviously sustain this high increase, which you have to deal with in a pandemic.
But quite a lot of the people
don't want to have that massive uplift.
Quite a lot of the people that you work with day and daily are going to have to lose their jobs under this plan. I'm just asking you, how many?
I don't think so, Andrew. I don't think so, Andrew. I think there is a number, and the way... Let me explain. I've worked for many years and had to do this many times. So what they have is a number that they have to get back down to in terms of head count. So what they can do is, as people retire or as they leave, they don't replace them. But some people they may make redundant as well. I'm not saying that's sometimes you have to do that. But most of because we have high numbers of people in the civil service. So in terms of percentage cut, it's manageable, and it's manageable within those normal cycles of churn, and also in terms of recruitment. So that is something I know from my own department, because we've obviously been through it. I'm not saying it's easy, but when you've put on a lot of staff in 3 years, it's not reasonable to expect the taxpayers to pay for that ad infinitum. It was there for a specific reason, to be able to deal with the pandemic.
Right.
Now we've dealt with most of the after effects of the pandemic, and we have to get the civil service just back to where it was at the beginning of 2020. That's all we're saying. It's nothing too radical.
It's still going to have to be quite a lot of jobs. Let me ask you about benefits then, because if you look at the costings... Sorry, I've moved on to benefits.
I don't suppose you've ever run a business, Andrew. That's what I'm getting from this conversation. Because actually, if you have... Okay, fine, but if you have a lot of people, and you have people who retire and people who leave, and you don't replace them, that is actually probably going to be the bulk of how they will manage it. And then there may be some targeted redundancies as well.
Okay,
but the numbers that I've seen show that being the approach.
Sure, let's turn to the benefits cuts, because these are by and large people on sickness or disability benefit who the Prime Minister, you, the government, think should actually be working, could actually be working. The process of getting enough people off those benefits, about half of them, to hit the targets, the numbers in your documents today, is going to be really, really hard. Lots of people have tried it in the past, and in the end, you're going to have to be quite tough, quite brutal. And again, I'd like to know how many people you need to move off benefits to hit the targets, to get the tax cuts that are in this manifesto.
So what this is also looking at pre-pandemic levels. So if we look at our welfare bill, at the beginning of 2020, so before the pandemic, our welfare bill, if we went back to what it was then, we'd save £35 billion a year. So what we're saying here is we should be able to get part of the way there through some of the initiatives that my colleague Mel Stride's put in place, including helping people back to work, helping people retrain, skills boot camps, all the things that we've introduced which are new, mental health support,
helping or
etc.
pushing.
All of those things should, well, if it was, we're only going back to part way to where we were before the pandemic. So what has happened is we've had an explosion during the pandemic of people who, either in the pandemic or post the pandemic, have gone on to sickness. And in particular, there's been a big increase in mental health. And what we're saying is we should be able to, now the pandemic's over, we should be able to get a third of the way back there, and that would give us £12 billion, which would pay for this. I don't think it's too unreasonable to expect that our sickness levels and our benefit levels would still be higher than where we were, but not as high as they are now. So that is the premise, and I think we've looked at this in schools as well. A lot of the advice and a lot of the things that happen, like social prescribing, etc., they basically say actually it's very good and good for you to get out, to go out and into work, and it really is good for people's mental health to actually be in a job and to get all of the benefits of being able to have a career and be able to get on in life.
Let me hop over to a couple of other issues today. Yet again, Nigel Farage has been physically attacked on the campaign trail today. Now, you don't agree with him, but I think you would say that everybody should be able to be out there campaigning physically without the threat of those kind of things. Do you think the time has come to give him police protection?
Well, I'm sorry to hear that, and I do agree that people shouldn't be. I admire politicians for standing up. In this democracy of ours, we have a lot of people who are going around streets, knocking on doors, talking to people, and that's very precious. And we are also very connected to our constituents. And so I'm sorry to hear that.
Sticking with my question,
I don't know whether it reaches the threshold. I don't know whether it reaches the threshold for police protection. I don't know. I mean, they will assess that. Actually, they would assess that, I'm sure, and look at that. But there's unfortunately too much abuse of politicians. There's unfortunately too much physical or even mental abuse online as well. There is too much of that. I mean, luckily we've got the mute button for online, but we're always. I remember my very first hustings. I remember my first hustings in a church many years ago, and somebody put a brick through the window. I mean, that that was shocking. It shocked me. It shocked everybody in there. It is. Many of my colleagues have had terrible things happen to them, and it is a very. It's probably a very small minority, but it's an ugly part of our democracy.